Hello and welcome back to the studio. Today's painting isn't a Bob Ross classic. In fact, it's a painting called Angler's Hell. It's based loosely on one of Bob's paintings called Angler's Haven, but this time I've made lots of mistakes. I've mixed mud at every occasion. This is really to help those of you who are struggling to avoid painting muddy paintings. Don't worry, you're not on your own, we've all done it. So use this one to see how you can avoid making mud in your next paintings. Happy painting, people. I hope. So we're off to a good start with our painting, and as you can see I've got the same two brushes back. They've been washed and they're dry. So let's start off by putting the liquid white on top and the liquid black underneath, but this time I'm going to go maybe just a little heavier with that liquid white. So come back in a second and see how we get on. So there it is, there's my liquid white. What I think is a nice thin even coat. I'll dry clean my brush and add the liquid black. There we go. Into my brush and lock it in. And just as before, thin even coat, liquid white and liquid black. Now let's start painting the sky. So here it is, here's my palette. I just put out the phthalo blue for the time being. I'll add the rest later on. And I've got my nice brush, just as I did in the original video. I'm going to pull out a little bit of phthalo blue and tap my brush well to drive the paint through the bristles. Okay, and let's see how we get on. I'm going to start up in my corners, adding some phthalo blue. And all looks well, I think. So a little more phthalo blue in the other corner. And I've had to put on quite a good amount, and I'll just let this colour fade away. There we go. So I've added some titanium white to my palette, and I gave my brush a little bit of a dry clean to get rid of some of that phthalo blue. And again, I'm paying special attention to how I load my brush. I'm going to try and get a nice amount of... So I've got a good amount on there. And let's try and put a little cloud into this sky. No, stop that bouncing around. Well, I don't know about you, but that looks a little bit lackluster to me. Let's try more. I'm having to really chunk this on. I'm having to put on a ton of white paint to try and make this stick. So this is the first problem I've given myself, is I've just been a fraction too heavy with this liquid white, and the problem is I now have a canvas which is too wet, and the titanium white brush, the titanium white paint just won't stick. It just isn't taking to the canvas very well. So you've only got to tap over this once or twice, and the paint is starting to sink into the canvas, and the liquid white is a booby trap here, and it's going to come back and it's going to haunt us later on in the painting again. Let's paint the mountain and see what happens to that. So this is Mud Mix 1, too much liquid white. Okay, so I've remixed my mountain mix colour, the blue, black, Van Dyke brown, alizarin crimson, exactly the same composition, similar sort of colour, and just as before I'm going to slide up and take a little roll of this paint and position it roughly in the same position in the sky. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be a little bit above. And just for the purposes of this demonstration, let's see how I can make this as dark as possible. Now, one of the things you'll notice almost straight away is that, again, the liquid white I put on there is really coming back to affect my thickness of paint here. On the first video you could see that I could put this on and scrape it off and still leave a nice dark stain, whereas with this what I'm doing is I'm just picking up liquid white, phthalo blue, and my mountain isn't really the right sort of colour. It's definitely not dark enough, so I've added a little bit more of that mountain mix colour to try and darken my mountains up again. Because unless I've got some dark colour under there, my snowy colours won't show up at all. They're just going to look pale on pale. So I've darkened it up a little bit more. My misty layer is starting to kind of been lost a little bit here because this colour is on here a little more heavily, so I'm starting to lose my mist. If I carry on, I'm going to lose it completely. I've been dry cleaning my brush all the way through this, and I'll be dry cleaning it one more time to see if I can save some of my misty areas. So here's my highlight and my shadow, mixed it up just as I did in the first painting. I pick up a nice little roll of paint, nice gentle touch here, point the knife to the top of the mountain here, and I'm going to touch with the paint, and we're going to just slide down the mountain here, and well, I'm not really having the same sort of success. I'm picking up a lot of the dark colour. My paint doesn't really want to stick, it's more sort of sliming along. The problem is I'm starting to pick up the underpainting. My highlights are starting, I'm being super gentle with this. I barely holding this knife. No matter how gently I hold it, I'm not leaving a nice bright snowy effect on the mountain. I'm just picking up more colour. Do one more go. So I've got another fresh clean roll of paint. Just go up and touch that other colour there and try and get this to break. And I'm having a bit more success with this colour. It's going on a bit more easily. But again, it's so easy to mix this up and make it look muddy. I'm picking up more colour than I'm laying down. And I'd have to say that I'm probably getting this to work simply because I've painted hundreds of mountains. But I'm sure someone who's a beginner will be mixing a lot more mud. And you can see there's very little play with this mountain before, well, it all starts to mix up again. So not a bad looking mountain, but certainly not as easy as it should be for a beginner. Let's press on and paint a little bit more of this mountain scene. Okay, so I've remixed my mountain mix. I've added some sap green into it. I dry clean my 1-inch brush to within an inch of its life to get as much paint out as possible. And I'm going to be careful how I load my paint. Do exactly the same as before, just tap into that colour. And again, I'm going to be putting on some little trees at the sides here. Again, I'll sketch out roughly where I want them to be. Remember, these need to be eventually to be nice and dark. So let's just drop in a little suggestion where these trees might want to go. Just adding more paint. I'm just trying to get this darker, and what's actually happening, if you could feel this brush that I'm holding, it's starting to feel sort of sticky, that the brush doesn't have that nice touch. It feels sort of soggy, and you guessed it, the liquid white we started with is again coming to the fore. I'm trying to save a little bit of the misty area in there, but I'm having to work quite hard at this to actually make this paint stick and be dark. I've added some highlighting colours to my palette. Cad, Indian yellow and ochre and some sap green, and dry clean my 1-inch brush just as on the original painting, and I'm going to load it very carefully. I'm going to use some sap green, a little bit of cad yellow, and I'm going to press my brush into this paint, make sure it's very open and lacy. So my brush looks similar, it's in good shape. Make sure it's really opened up. There we go. Give it every chance possible. So that's it. It's nice and open and lacy, and the light is coming from this direction. So let's see if I can highlight these trees. And I'm being very gentle with this. As you can see, I am not getting that lovely bright colour again. What's happening is that the paint isn't sticking, it's just going back down into the centre of the brush. Let's load our brush again. some more colour. Let's try that one more time. Again, it's just dull. If I go over it one more time, let's see. So I've loaded a lot more paint on my brush. Let's see if I can get something to stand out. Now I'm being super gentle here. I'm being very delicate with my brush work. And I can see now if I went over that again, that I've just been carrying on mixing more mud. This is just getting more and more muddy. My highlights are just, but they're just not there really, are they? They're just looking really flat. Let's try this one. Again, I'm just not getting that lovely vibrant colour here, and almost instantly I start mixing this mud. This colour here I referred to in the original video. Once you start seeing this colour coming up on your brush and on your palette, you're becoming a mud mixer, and it'll do a great job of making your painting look much more like army camouflage, and it will do a lovely sort of vibrant scene. So already I'm in trouble here, and I'll carry on trying to highlight this, but I think you'll see that no matter what I do now, all I'm going to do is mix more mud. Well, I gave it my best shot, and I was very, very gentle with this brush. I barely touching with it, but no matter how careful I was, all I managed to do was get one little patch of yellow ochre and Indian yellow to stick. Most everything else has just gone this sort of dull, muddy, sort of green colour here. And the other thing that some of you will have noticed, the eagle-eyed amongst you, will notice I'm actually painting on a board. And I make reference to this in the original video because I paint on paper, but it's actually stretched over a canvas, so I have some bounce. And this is another essential part, and people seem to forget that really you want a canvas which is actually moving under your brush, so that when you dab, the canvas gives a little bit. Now I'm used to painting on all sorts of surfaces, so I'm used to being a bit more gentle, but if you're a beginner, you're just starting out, and you're trying to paint on canvas boards, you'll find that they're very unyielding, and they're very unforgiving. They don't have any kind of life in them. So my suggestion is make some DIY canvases if you're on a budget, and use some paper and give it a coat of some acrylic or some white gesso or grey gesso as I've used here, and make yourself some practice canvases. They cost pennies and they'll save you a lot of heartache. Remember the golden rule: a thin paint will stick to a thick paint. And this is supposed to be thick and dry. And one of the things I would often tell my students in my class who would complain that their underpainting was far too dry and could they add some thinners to it, I said if you add thinners to it, you're actually ruining any chance you've got getting a highlight to stick to it, because this paint here is supposed to be dry and firm and very sticky, and the highlights are supposed to be thin and oily, and they will stick. So if you thin this layer down thinner, more oily than the highlights, it'll never stick. So let's see if I can get a couple of fir trees in here. If I'm careful, I might do it. It feels quite soggy as well. I'll put some little bushes around here, but I need to give this a dry clean, and then I can put some highlights on it. I put out some fresh cad yellow and a couple of drops of some thinners, just to try and make my paint oily enough and thin enough to stick. So you can see it's really runny, almost like water. It'll have to be that thin to stand even a remote chance of sticking to these fir trees. So again, I think the light's coming from this left side. See, I'm touching very gently here. What I'm actually doing is I'm actually pulling off the dark colour. This colour will not stick. Let me zoom you in a bit there. Show you I'm not kidding. It's even barely a trace. No matter how hard I push, what I'm doing is I'm just picking up the dark green colour. The underpainting is too oily and too thin. No matter how thin this colour is, the highlight colour, it's just not going to stick. And I dry cleaned my old brush just as I did in the original painting, and I'm going to use Prussian blue and a little bit of the phthalo green colour. And let's say in the original painting, the liquid black takes on the colours of the Prussian blue and the phthalo green white. So it gives you. Let's just rub this into the painting. So what's happening here is because I'm painting on a board, my knife tends to skid across the surface. It doesn't actually grab the paint, it just kind of skates across the surface a little bit. Even if I push real hard, it's really not taking much of the paint, it's just skating across the surface. I think what you're seeing here is actually more where I'm actually taking the paint off than actually putting paint on. I'm really bending this knife and I can't really get it to actually take any colour off. This is just the grey of the canvas coming through. Literally I'm just moving the paint aside. So this is just too wet, and this is my problem. I can't get a waterline to stick. And I think that's really the sort of the final bit of proof that I need, that just putting on too much liquid white, too much liquid black, and if we were using it too much liquid clear, is one of the main problems for painting muddy paintings and for mixing a lot of mud.
So there you have it. How to paint mud, or rather how to avoid painting mud. Take these new skills and paint your next Bob Ross painting. In fact, there's another little one coming right along now. Happy painting, people. Ooh, and don't forget, you can always give this a thumbs up.